Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal interesting details on Wednesday, August 13, 2025. First, Anna sat in her office, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of her desk. The weight of the situation was heavy on her shoulders. Brennan, a man whose loyalty had always been shrouded in mystery, was in possession of crucial information that could break the case wide open. Anna knew it wasn't going to be easy, but she was determined to make him see reason. Brennan had been investigating the project for months, Dalton's research, which had been at the heart of the dark conspiracy unraveling in their midst. But it wasn't just Dalton that was involved, Jocelyn and Emma were caught in the tangled web as well. Their lives were now intricately tied to the deadly secrets, and Anna was desperate to get to the truth before it was too late. She paced the floor, mentally rehearsing the conversation she was about to have. Brennan wasn't the type to give up his secrets easily. He had always played things close to the chest, trusting only a select few. Anna knew this, and it worried her. She couldn't help but wonder what Brennan's real motivations were. Was he truly loyal to the right side of the law, or had his actions been driven by something darker? He had been gathering intelligence, but he had yet to share it with anyone. The silence was deafening, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came out, one way or another. Brennan's investigation had centered around Dalton's project, an elaborate scientific venture that, on the surface, seemed innocent enough. However, beneath the layers of legitimacy, it was clear that something far more sinister was at play. Anna had seen enough to know that the project had far-reaching implications, and she wasn't the only one who had begun to feel its effects. Jocelyn, who had unwittingly become entangled in the project, was a pawn in this dangerous game. Emma, too, had no idea what she was walking into when she became involved. They had all been victims of a system that had been carefully constructed to deceive, manipulate, and destroy. Anna's mind raced as she recalled the first time she had met Brennan. He had been the quiet observer, the one who kept to the shadows, always watching, always calculating. At that time, Anna hadn't fully understood his motives, but now, it was all beginning to make sense. He was an asset, a person with knowledge that could tip the scales in their favor. But getting him to cooperate would require more than just a conversation. She had to find the right approach, one that would make him see that working with the police was in everyone's best interest. The stakes were higher than ever, and Anna knew that every minute that passed without Brennan's cooperation only pushed them further away from the truth. The police had been investigating for weeks, but without solid evidence, the case had stalled. The fact that Brennan had information that could break the case wide open was both a blessing and a curse. He was a wild card, someone who could either help them or lead them down a dangerous path. Anna couldn't afford to make any mistakes. She had already seen how fragile the investigation was, how easily it could all crumble under the weight of secrets and lies. The truth was out there, hidden in plain sight, and Brennan held the key. But would he hand it over? She knew Brennan wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea of speaking to the police. His history with the law was complicated, and he had always preferred to operate outside the boundaries of official channels. But Anna wasn't about to let that stop her. She had a responsibility to the people who had been affected by Dalton's project, to Jocelyn, to Emma, and to everyone who was unknowingly walking into danger. The only way to make sure the truth came to light was to convince Brennan that his actions had consequences, not just for him, but for everyone involved. Anna's strategy was clear: she would appeal to his sense of duty, his moral compass. She would remind him that withholding information was no longer an option. The police were closing in, and without Brennan's help, the investigation would falter. She would tell him that by coming forward and sharing what he knew, he could help put an end to the nightmare that had been growing in the shadows. If he truly cared about the people involved, if he truly wanted to see justice done, then he had to take action now. There was no room for hesitation. The truth needed to come to the surface, and Brennan had the power to make that happen. As Anna prepared herself to confront Brennan, she couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation would be a turning point. She had no idea what his response would be, but one thing was certain: the clock was ticking. Every second that passed without action was another moment of danger for Jocelyn, Emma, and countless others caught in the web of lies. Anna knew she couldn't afford to wait any longer. She had to get through to Brennan, no matter what it took. Second, Joe's heart was a battlefield, torn between longing and resentment. For years, he had lived with the belief that his parents, Brooke Lynn and Dante, were simply figures in his past, figures he barely knew, figures who had left him behind without explanation or reason. The news that he was their son had sent shockwaves through his soul, unsettling the delicate balance he had carefully constructed for himself. The revelation felt like an imposition, as though a reality he wasn't prepared for had suddenly been thrust upon him. He couldn't reconcile the image he had of his parents with the reality of what they had been, a couple trying to fix mistakes from their past, mistakes that had left their son feeling abandoned, forgotten. Brooke Lynn and Dante, despite the passage of time, were determined to reclaim the relationship they once had with Gio. They were ready to face the consequences of their past actions, hoping that their son would be able to forgive them and allow them to make amends. Yet, for Gio, their sudden appearance felt like a whirlwind, one that threatened to pull him into a world he wasn't sure he belonged to. Every gesture, every word they spoke in an attempt to bridge the gap between them only made him feel more disconnected. The love they offered seemed like a foreign concept, and Gio couldn't help but wonder if it was too late for such things. Could he really forgive them for the years they had spent apart? Could he allow them back into his life, knowing that they had missed so much of it? It was in these moments of doubt and confusion that Rocco became Joe's anchor. Rocco had always been there for Gio, but now, more than ever, his presence was invaluable. With quiet patience, Rocco listened to Joe's fears, his uncertainties, and his pain. He never pushed Gio to make any decisions, never forced him to feel something he wasn't ready to feel. Instead, he offered a gentle reminder: healing takes time. Rocco knew that Joe's journey was going to be long and fraught with emotional obstacles, but he also knew that Gio didn't have to go through it alone. He was there for him, always, to lend an ear or a shoulder, to provide support when the weight of the situation became too much to bear. Rocco's approach was simple yet profound. He didn't try to fix Joe's problems or offer easy solutions. Instead, he encouraged Gio to sit with his feelings, to give himself permission to feel anger, hurt, and confusion. It wasn't about pretending everything was fine. It was about acknowledging the pain that came with reconnecting with parents who had been absent for so long. Rocco knew that it wasn't easy to accept the idea of family when that family had failed you in the past. But he also knew that Gio had to make that choice for himself. He couldn't be forced into forgiveness, but he could be shown that it was possible, and that the path to healing was one he could walk at his own pace. Rocco also reminded Gio of the sacredness of family, of the irreplaceable bonds that existed, despite the mistakes and the time lost. Joe's hesitancy was understandable. Family wasn't something that could be simply picked up and put back together like it had never been broken. But Rocco helped him see that family, in its truest form, was about love and understanding. It was not about perfection, and it was not about erasing the past. It was about moving forward, together, with all the mistakes and the scars that came with it. Rocco's gentle words struck a chord in Joe's heart, and for the first time, he began to understand that forgiveness wasn't just a gift to his parents, it was a gift to himself. The truth was, Gio had been holding on to the hurt for so long that it had become a part of him. He wore it like a shield, protecting himself from the pain of rejection and loss. But Rocco's support made him realize that holding on to that pain wasn't doing him any favors. It was only preventing him from moving forward, from opening his heart to the possibility of healing. And as difficult as it was to let go, Rocco showed Gio that it was the only way to find peace. The process of forgiving his parents would not be easy, but it was the first step toward reclaiming the family he had once been a part of. With Rocco's encouragement, Gio began to take small steps toward reconciliation. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't know if he would ever be able to fully forgive Brooke Lynn and Dante for their absence. But with Rocco by his side, he was willing to try. He realized that family wasn't about erasing the past, it was about finding a way to move forward, to create new memories, and to build something stronger from the foundation of what had been broken. Gio began to understand that the love his parents offered wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was worth fighting for. As the days passed, Joe's heart began to soften. He allowed himself to imagine a future where he could embrace the possibility of a new beginning with Brooklyn and Dante. He knew that there would be challenges ahead, old wounds would reopen, and trust would have to be rebuilt. But for the first time in a long while, Gio felt a sense of hope. Rocco's unwavering support had given him the strength to see beyond the pain and to believe that, with time, his relationship with his parents could heal. It wasn't going to be easy, but with love, patience, and understanding, it was possible. And as he took that first step toward forgiveness, Gio knew that he was not alone. He had Rocco, and he had the chance to rewrite the story of his family, one step at a time. Third, Willow sat in the dimly lit room, her body weighed down by the heavy burden of her emotions. She had never imagined that her life would spiral out of control the way it had. Her once perfect world with Drew had been shattered when she discovered his betrayal. Her heart, once filled with love and trust, now felt like a fragile shell, broken by the lies that had cut too deep to ignore. The pain of his affair with Nina was more than just the sting of infidelity. It was the realization that the man she thought she knew, the man she had built a life with, had kept her in the dark about something so monumental. The betrayal had not only crushed their relationship, but it had also torn apart her sense of self, her confidence, and her belief in love. She had trusted him, given him everything, and now, all that remained was the feeling of being utterly discarded. As she sat across from Elizabeth, Willow couldn't help but feel the weight of her grief. It was as though every part of her had been exposed, laid bare, and she had no choice but to confront the reality of her situation. She spoke slowly, her voice trembling as she recounted the unraveling of her marriage. She had never thought Drew would hurt her this way, but the evidence was undeniable. He had chosen Nina, a woman who had always been in the background, and she had watched as Drew's affection for her grew stronger. Willow had tried to ignore the signs, hoping that her suspicions were unfounded, but in the end, the truth had come crashing down. The pain was overwhelming, and it seemed like there was no escaping it. Elizabeth listened intently, her eyes full of empathy as she absorbed the depth of Willow's sorrow. Willow had always been a loving and devoted wife, and hearing her speak of her pain made Elizabeth's heart ache. She could understand the feeling of betrayal, having been through her own struggles in the past. But Elizabeth knew that healing wasn't easy, and it didn't come quickly. There were no simple solutions to the kind of hurt Willow was experiencing. Still, Elizabeth couldn't help but offer words of comfort, trying to help her friend see beyond the immediate darkness that had enveloped her. "You're not alone in this, Willow," Elizabeth said softly. "I know it feels like the world is falling apart, but you have the strength to get through it." Willow looked at Elizabeth, her eyes full of doubt. How could she believe in strength when all she felt was shattered? How could she move forward when her trust had been broken, her heart betrayed, and her family torn apart? Drew's actions had not only affected her relationship with him but had also impacted her connection with Michael, her husband. Michael, too, had been hurt by the betrayal, and as their marriage crumbled, Willow found herself separated from her children, the very essence of her motherhood slipping away. She had never wanted this, never imagined that her life could be turned upside down in such a cruel and irreversible way. Michael had taken her right to be a mother to their children, and the void left by that loss was a wound that felt impossible to heal. She felt as though she had lost everything, not just in her marriage but also in her sense of identity. But Elizabeth, in her quiet wisdom, continued to reassure Willow. "You've been through so much," she said gently, "and it's okay to feel the way you do. You have every right to be angry, to be hurt, to question everything. But remember, this pain won't define you forever. You have the power to take control of your life again." Willow had never considered that. Taking control of her life after everything had fallen apart. It felt impossible, but Elizabeth's words planted a seed of hope, a tiny flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness. Perhaps, just perhaps, Willow could find a way to rebuild what had been broken. But the journey would require more than just healing from Drew's betrayal, it would require reclaiming herself, her motherhood, and her sense of peace. Elizabeth's voice broke through Willow's spiraling thoughts. "Don't let this define who you are," she said. "You are not just a wife. You are a mother, a strong woman who has so much love to give. This is just a chapter in your life, and it may feel like the end of everything right now, but it's not." Elizabeth's words resonated with Willow on a deeper level. She had been so consumed by the loss of her marriage, by the hurt of Drew's lies, that she had forgotten who she truly was. She had allowed herself to be defined by her relationship with Drew and Michael, but Elizabeth reminded her that her worth wasn't tied to anyone else's actions. Willow was still Willow, she was still a mother, a person with a heart full of love and a future to rebuild. Willow wiped her eyes, feeling the smallest shift in her heart. Maybe she could take those first steps toward healing, but it wouldn't be easy. It would take time to process the pain, to forgive Drew for the damage he had done, and to find a way back to her children. But Elizabeth was right, she couldn't let this moment define her future. The road ahead would be difficult, and there would be days when the weight of the world felt unbearable. But Willow had always been resilient, and with Elizabeth by her side, perhaps she could find the strength to rise again. She would have to fight for her place in her children's lives, fight for her right to be the mother she had always wanted to be. But more than that, she would have to fight for herself, to reclaim her identity, to rebuild the parts of her that had been broken, and to heal the wounds that ran deeper than she had ever imagined. As the conversation with Elizabeth continued, Willow realized that while the pain would never completely go away, it didn't have to control her life. She could heal, even if it took time. She could forgive, even if it felt impossible. And most importantly, she could love herself again, despite the mistakes, the betrayals, and the heartbreak. Willow wasn't defined by the hurt she had experienced, she was defined by her resilience, her strength, and the love she still had to give. Finally, you wouldn't want to miss what Drew said today. It was a complete shock. Drew, in his usual calculated manner, accused Stella of insurance fraud, dragging her name through the mud in front of everyone. He didn't stop there, he then threw down an open challenge to Curtis and Portia, daring them to face the truth of what he was saying. His words were sharp, venomous, and meant to incite chaos. It was clear that Drew had no intention of playing nice. The audacity to publicly accuse someone within the family of such a crime was shocking enough, but to go further and challenge Curtis and Portia directly? It was a move that no one saw coming. The room erupted in tension as Drew's words hit their mark. Curtis, usually the calm one, could barely contain his anger. His face turned red with fury, and it was evident that Drew had crossed a line. Portia, equally furious, stood frozen, struggling to process the accusation. How could Drew, of all people, make such an outrageous claim? And worse, how could he so easily throw their family into turmoil just to play his own game? The weight of the accusation seemed almost too much to bear, especially knowing that Drew, with all his charm and manipulation, had once been trusted by them. For the entire family, the impact of Drew's words was like a slap in the face. Stella, who had always been a part of their family's foundation, was suddenly under suspicion. No one knew whether to defend her or confront the possibility that Drew's words might hold some truth. The idea of an insurance scam, especially tied to someone so close to them, was almost too much to fathom. But what made it worse was Drew's smug confidence. He wasn't apologetic, he wasn't even concerned with the damage he was causing. He seemed to relish in the chaos, feeding off the anger and confusion his accusations stirred. Drew's challenge to Curtis and Portia only made things worse. It was as if he was daring them to react, knowing full well that they couldn't just sit back and let this slide. The betrayal was cutting deep, and for a moment, it felt as though the fragile trust that had been built over years was beginning to crumble. Drew had always had a knack for making people question everything they believed in, but this time, his cruelty had gone too far. He was no longer the charming, misunderstood figure he had once been. Instead, he was a manipulative force, using lies and deceit to stir up trouble, regardless of who got hurt in the process. The air was thick with anger, confusion, and disbelief as everyone processed what had just happened. Curtis, in particular, was barely holding it together. He had always tried to be the voice of reason, the one who protected his family, but Drew had struck at the heart of everything Curtis held dear. His sense of justice, his love for his family. Everything was being called into question by Drew's reckless accusations. How could Drew do this to them? To Stella? To the family they had built together? Portia, equally enraged, didn't know whether to confront Drew directly or to just walk away from the entire situation. It was clear that Drew wasn't going to back down, and for once.